In 2014, the Education Cabinet Secretary, Professor Kaimenyi, formed a task force headed by Kilemi Mwiria. One of its notable and beneficial outcomes was that the cost of secondary education was capped at 53,000 shillings a year. It wasn't free like primary education, but that cap was significant and went a long way in democratizing access to education. Then something else happened, and that is the 100% transition, whose aim is to ensure that no child is left behind. That education wasn't just for the high scorers or those with money to pay for the best schools. However, a new phenomenon threatens to claw back on all these gains. There is a new barrier to accessing education: school uniforms. Just ask all the parents currently taking their children to Form 1 at this time, and their stories will shock you. You see, schools now require parents to purchase uniforms either at the school or at selected stockists. They claim that it is all about ensuring what they call uniformity. Now, whilst that may be the case, it comes at a price, a heavy price. For instance, one school requires parents to pay 33,500 shillings for uniform alone, while another is asking for 10,900 shillings. Yet another is asking parents to part with 24,950 shillings for uniforms alone. In fact, this same school is also charging 1,100 shillings for one blanket. One. All of which must be purchased from the school and nowhere else. I know several places where one can get a blanket for a fraction of that price, and I'm sure you do too. So, what if a parent cannot afford a 1,100 shillings blanket? Does it mean their children cannot get an education? One secondary school has written to parents saying, and I quote, "Parents are expected to pay 17,200 shillings for school uniform, which will be centrally purchased to get rid of color differences," end quote. Now, this poses a challenge to parents in that it forces them to buy from the school with no chance or choice to find a more affordable option elsewhere. In a depressed economy with parents struggling and in a free market that allows consumers the freedom of choice. This is not how we used to do it. I remember my mother and others finding more affordable ways to kit us for school. From buying wool affordably and knitting our school sweaters, to buying fabric and stitching the skirts and trousers at home. And what of parents who don't have money to buy uniforms, but make do with hand-me-downs from the older siblings to the younger ones? What of options like going to Gikomba or any other second-hand market in the country to buy the uniforms at a more affordable price? Also, you and I know that there were times when our parents would go to the local shopkeeper and take items on credit and then pay up slowly. But that is not the case today, with parents being forced to pay up front, all the money at once. Also note that the account to which they pay for the uniforms is different from the one for school fees, and that one's child will not be admitted if the school uniform is not paid for in full. Don't get me wrong. Quality is important. So is uniformity of color for the uniforms of children at the school. But I'm not so sure that a specific color shade of uniform is among our education goals, such that it now becomes a barrier for many to access school. Furthermore, isn't it interesting that schools, which ideally should be in the business of providing the service of educating our children, have now gone into the retail space, selling uniforms, mattresses, and even bed sheets, and forcing parents to purchase the items at a set price. The Competition Authority of Kenya weighed in on this, asking the Ministry of Education to set guidelines for minimum quality of uniforms, while at the same time providing parents with their fundamental right of choice. Now, it is this part of their statement that for me is most striking. I quote, "The alleged exclusive contracts deprive parents of one of their key fundamental rights, the right of choice, without providing reasonable grounds such as quality of uniforms," end quote. For parents who are already struggling to raise money for school fees, this is a tough time. Picture this. The Kilemi Mwiria committee fought hard to subsidize the secondary school fees to 53,000 shillings per year. Yet parents are forced to part with up to 30,000 shillings at once at the start of the term. So what are we saying? That uniform is now more expensive than school fees? It's like giving with one hand and taking with the other. All these expensive requirements, by the way, make nonsense of the 100% transition whose basic principle is that everyone must move to secondary school, only for them to meet the big hurdle of expensive school uniforms. Professor Magoha says no child should be denied a place at school because there are no classrooms. Yet children are being denied a place because they've not paid thousands of shillings for school uniforms. Either we have 100% transition or we don't. Either we're making education affordable or we're not. Either we're giving parents and their children a fair chance at education without steep requirements, or we're not. It really is that simple. That's my take tonight.